Welcome everyone, Simon here from the Whales of Wall Street. We have a Powerledger video for you guys today. The studio is coming along behind me. It's a bit slow process, but it's coming along and should be finished very soon. And we'll definitely be doing a lot more live videos as time goes by. But the topic around today is very much on the top layer is to, as investors, start thinking a bit more, if not doing so already, what industries and sectors our projects are actually in that we invest in. And we talk about this a lot on the channel in regards to some of the really kind of like top line ones, and ones that I'm definitely interested, whether that's because I've had a career in some of these industries or at least know quite a bit about each of these areas. And for me, the likes of course artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, blockchain in general of course, but the energy sector, the healthcare sector, trade finance, all these areas are really significantly accelerating their efforts in the digitalization, the electronic aspects of their operations, and utilizing those kind of three pillar technologies that I've just mentioned, the IoT, AI, and blockchain coming together. And there's a few alterations on top of that. We've mentioned that in a recent video, like 5G, for example, for the connectivity aspects, amongst other things as well. But the energy sector is of great interest. There's obviously a lot of money in this, and the renewable energy sector is so huge. It's been around for some time now, especially I think even when I was younger, I saw some of the first like models of wind turbine projects. That's probably about 30 years ago maybe, and kind of getting fascinated by that. It was going to all these weird like trade shows as a kid with my dad in the defense industry and things like this, and you could never really analyze at that age, but certainly even as an industry, it was clear that people knew what was coming. And I guess from an investment perspective, people obviously took advantage of that. But as things have progressed and technology has progressed, and certainly the way that governments and regulatory organizations out there have put more stamp on how we do things and how it should be done. And you know, we can think all day long about the different reasons as to why they do it, for tax or whatever it is, clawing back things. But the ultimate thing is, of course, a huge topic recently is the ESGs. Now, when I first started in marketing about 12 or so years ago, maybe a bit longer than that, the aspect of sustainability was something that was coming or creeping into a lot of marketing terminology, something that you should have had a page of on your website, whatever business or company that you were. And this was the CSR. It's like the corporate social responsibility, if I remember correctly. And this has evolved over time. And a lot of people now hear the words or the abbreviation of ESG. And it's very similar in terms of the environmental sustainability, the social aspects, etc. And a lot of this does filter down from UN initiatives, certainly from the Agenda 30 program, the United Nations document that you can download. It's all public available, from the World Economic Forum as well. And it's trickled down, and it's almost created its own little economy. Because what it's started to do, and we'll go into a bit more detail in a second when we look at this in a bit more detail, it's allowed governments and regulatory frameworks, whether it be the Financial Conduct Authority here in the UK and whatever your equivalent is in the countries that you're from, have started putting targets for companies. Now there's all these targets like the 2050 modules, the 2030 targets, but in amongst all of that is this opportunity to try and potentially fine companies, and there's an actual regulation going through right now through the European Union to fine companies potentially around 4% of revenue if they are misleading with their sustainability or environmental goals or targets, or indeed the results of what they've been achieving or not achieving in this instance. So there's a big pressure for most companies around the world, and pretty much everyone, and including individuals like you and I, will have to adhere to a lot of this over the coming years as well. We've already seen some implementations like ULEZ here in the UK, which is the formality of being fined for driving certain old cars or not within the remit of emission requirements for the UK governance. And I think there's probably similar ones across the world as well. But what's really interesting is this all coming together at the similar time. And for a company, of course, 4% revenue, if you're a multi-million pound or dollar company, 4% is a lot of money. And even to us, 4% could be quite a lot as well. So that gives you a bit of a monetary aspect to it. And then we start seeing, well, okay, how does Powerledger or blockchain fit into this? Now, blockchain, of course, is phenomenal in terms of the ability to process, validate transactions, to hold essentially lucrative data, and particularly when we're talking about this electronic contracts, electronic certificates. And one of the big areas around this is kind of like, they call it, the electronic attribute certificates. It's like the EAC, and some are called like RECs or RECS, and this is very much around renewable energy certificates. And these are basically, I wouldn't call them bonds, but I'm trying to give a bit of a visual representation of this. But these are essentially certificates that are held or a company would buy and essentially confirm and produce the evidence that they have bought this amount of energy from this company or this producer. This is definitively 100% this amount of quantity of carbon credit in whatever format is, electric, gas, whatever. And with the utilization of blockchain, that can be processed, transferred, you name it, within milliseconds now, right? Because you think about the transactions per second and why now TPS, transaction per second, becomes such a really valid topic more than ever before. So we've got these elements here, and the likes of Powerledger with like the TraceX system, for example, it now allows people to essentially remove intermediaries. So where before you would, it's kind of difficult because you and I would just pay our energy bills, but in amongst all that, some of the bigger costs involved in that are things like the maintenance aspects of energy. I mean, there's so much wastage of energy, like leaks in pipes and things, but we pay for that. They always go on, companies always say like, oh yeah, we're fixing this, fixing that, but then our energy prices go up for a multitude of reasons, of course. But what's interesting, if you deep dive into this fully, there's a lot of intermediary costs, people or brokers buying from national grids or plants and then making that energy logistically transferable to us as users. If we start eradicating that, and I'm not saying that this is going to happen publicly for a while, but we do have the ability with blockchain to be able to become prosumers, which we talked about loads on this channel, that you and I could share carbon credits using platforms like Powerledger with excess energy or energy that we've created from solar panels, etc., putting that into the grid, but not like the old days of putting into the grid and we don't really see anything out of it for another 20 years. I mean that you and I could do that in a decentralized format. But on a company level, this is an obscene amount of money, and it loops around to the fact that there's a lot of greenwashing. This is an interesting terminology over the last few years where companies have potentially lied about their results of sustainability or their environmental impact, and essentially also potentially fudging some numbers with regards to the costs of energy. So all of a sudden we start eradicating that. The tax man's very happy because it's all validated, processed, essentially automated now, and the utilization of artificial intelligence for algorithms of real-time data, for energy to be passed around based on supply and demand on real time. This is very important words, real time, whereas a lot of it before was either predicted or done on a very manual basis, and hence a lot of cost. And again, the cost tends to come to us in the form of our bills. It's not like companies are really nice and they pay for this. I mean, I get letters from E.ON saying I'm using 100% renewable energy, which is great, because I'm like, okay, cool, the wind and the sun, brilliant. Of course, there is money to pay for the infrastructure and this, that, and the other, but bills are going higher. So there's a lot of things going on in the background for this. So when we talk about these certificates, I'm actually just going to jump into a couple of articles here, guys, to put a bit more emphasis on this and then start looping it around as to why I have always been interested in Powerledger and the Powerledger token, how that kind of works, and loads of other attributes as to why this particular area, the sector and industry, is such an important one and for these years to come. So we'll go into this price point in a bit more detail shortly, but it's about this, leveraging the cost effectiveness and time saving aspects of certificate procurement. Now, procurement tends to be the terminology of where there's either teams or individuals within departments finding the best cost of something or the best supply of something. And this is no different to the energy remit. And hospitals, for example, can be paying maybe £2-3 million or something in regards to energy per year. So that's just hospitals. And you can imagine like companies with humongous skyscrapers and things like this, how much their energy bills must be. So it's really important that they get this correct and right. And if they don't do so, and they have not necessarily fraudulent information, but inaccurate information, this is where we get to that point of this. So, for example, this is written back in May. The European Union introducing stringent regulations to combat greenwashing. Companies now face potential penalties of up to 4% of their annual revenue for making misleading environmental claims. So again, you've already got one systematic problem here that's been going on for a long time, the greenwashing element, essentially. You could call it a tax job, whatever. The point being is that there is a problem. The problem has been created. And the solution is ultimately things like the TraceX ability, or people or companies being able to jump onto projects and technology software like this to make sure they avoid these kind of outcomes. And sometimes they're doing it accidentally, sometimes they might be doing it on purpose. But we know for a fact that there's many companies out there that avoid so many different things. But this is the point. The terminology of ESG wasn't just about climate change. You know, whether you believe in this or not, everyone's got different opinions about what's actually really going on and what isn't. But the fact of the matter is, this has been devised. Whether it's a moneymaker or not, the fact of the matter is, as an investor, we look at the solutions. What can we invest in that are solutions to problems, whether those problems are real or not, or made out of thin air for random reasons that don't make any sense, but we still abide by them or pay for them. So we've got all these elements like putting back in a full circle. And in fact, let's look at this one here. This is another prime example. Think of the banking system. Can you believe this? You think like the SEC and the governments, etc., are probably on side with banks, but I feel like the last 5-10 years that's been switching quite a lot. The SEC fines Deutsche Bank subsidiary $19 million for misstating ESG objectives. So this is from September, guys. $19 million for misstating. So again, proving that element of greenwashing. So what do banks and big companies need to start doing? They need to start using projects and technology outlets such as this TraceX platform. This isn't just the only one, guys. Obviously, like Energy Web have a few very interesting projects going on at the moment and have been for many years, as do Powerledger and many others as well. And this orientation just doesn't stop at energy sector, guys. This can also be very much kind of formulated around other sectors as well. When we talked about like trade finance in the past, we thought about the aspect of how much money could be saved with electronic trade documents, the reduction in resource and time. One of the really interesting case studies was like Lloyd's, for example, showcased real estate that the utilization of blockchain, they bought together something like $46 million worth of land, and several parties were involved in that investment and that buying selling process. That would normally take months, maybe even years. It was done within a couple of hours, and we sit there and we go, wow, if we can do that in that speed, think of how fast the economy could grow even further than ever before. But then also the cost reduction. And then there's always the argument, okay, what do people do? Because everything's becoming automated and using blockchain and AI. So there's a huge conversation that for another day about basic universal income and all these things. But the point being is that the technology is here and the sectors are very much onboarding right now. And on top of that, those who like him or not, I'm very interested in what David Icke says sometimes, and his real interesting philosophy about what tends to happen at the top level is they'll have a solution, which is a money maker, and they know it is, but they can't use it because there's not a problem. So whoever creates a problem, puts in their solution, then we rely on it, we depend on it, and ultimately, if you depend on something, you've lost control. So this whole pattern now, whoever's created this infrastructure initially or originally around ESG, which I said is an evolution for many, many decades now, and responsibilities to be more sustainable and environmental. So there's obviously like some pros and cons to it to an extent. Is now at this point where now companies and even banks can't get away with this. And the beauty of blockchain, of course, being majority of it being publicly available, is that we can potentially now see the discriminations or the fraudulent activity potentially ourselves. And there's a lot of clever people out there that can spot things really quickly. But the fact of the matter is, even like organizations like the SEC, as I said, the FCA here in the UK, the EU regulations going in there right now are forcing at that top level, way beyond banks, way beyond companies and institution levels, to enforce this. And this will trickle down, guys, because either the companies will pass on costs to us, and that includes the energy companies, or we will be having to do this similar compliance ourselves. And mark my words, it's coming, and it's already started. As I said, there's many things around us already that people are sitting there going, oh, what's this? I didn't ask for this, but it's here and we have to abide by it, because if you don't, you get fined or seize your car, whatever. But it's not just cars, it's the whole energy spectrum and pretty much many other things that we can attribute to our lives and how we live, purchase, sell, transportation, everything. We're really in an interesting space and time at the moment. So that's kind of why I wanted to wrap up and probably just mention this at the beginning. But yes, these certificates are essentially, as I said, I try to kind of represent it as like a bond. It's like a certificate that a company can buy to prove what it's obtained, where it's been obtained from, and ultimately prove its sustainability worth, and vice versa. It can work both ends of that journey. So the TradeX platform, of course, and many of the other aspects of Powerledger are powered by the POWR token, which you can stake. There's a link here, by the way, and I'll do a separate video on this of how to stake, and you can do it via the Powerledger wallet aspects or through the Ethereum connection as well. We'll go through that properly, but the point being is that this Power token has a lot of utility, guys. And this TraceX has been around for a couple of years, but it's changed its modulation just purely because of the evolution, as I said, of ESG in general. And now there is a problem. The problem has now officially been created in the last couple of years, and more so now this year than ever before, as we see all these weird protests popping up everywhere about insulation and oil and all of this. I personally don't watch the news and believe everything I see. I believe that there's a bigger interesting thing going on, of course, at this moment in time, and I think we will see the fruition of all of this in the coming years, and especially leading up to 2030. So mark my words, in these next 2 years are very crucial for blockchain environment and companies like Powerledger to really put a stamp in this area. There's a lot of great case studies from Powerledger, Energy Web, all of these really cool companies of how blockchain is being utilized in these energy sector areas, and how we can become prosumers, but also from a company level, why they will need to start using platforms like this from a trading perspective, a brokering perspective, saving costs for themselves as well at the same time, but also to eradicate the opportunity of getting fined substantial amounts of money. Now, before we go into the chart of Powerledger token, which before I give this bit of a quick overview of where the price has been with Powerledger in the past. Now, of course, back in 2021 with the big bull run that we had across the board, shot up to around about 72 to around I think the highest point was around 76 cents. Now, I don't think that takes into fruition the launch of the token area back here in 2018, where it saw about 179. So I'm not going to focus too much on that, because I do think that's always skewed in product launches. But from this instance, you could argue that there's not a huge jump between its current price point to where we saw those previous or most nearest all-time highs around 76 cents. Still a good gain opportunity. However, if we just switch to the actual chart properly, if you give me 2 seconds, we can start looking specifically at where we think Powerledger could go. So first of all, we've got a load of variables to think about now. We've got the previous highs here at that, around about that 76 cent mark, albeit on here for some reason the charts are always messed up, but the argument is that we could reach that dollar mark quite easily with Powerledger in the next run. Personally, I think that with the relation to what's going on in the ESG, the fact that probably the bull run will start around the midpoint of next year and into 2025, with all these things going on around ESG and all the other initiatives around energy transformation and the utilization of blockchain in general, I think we could really push the boundaries here, guys. And I think if we look at these top higher levels of the fib retracement charts, there is an argument to say that we could easily identify perhaps potentially the 170 and maybe even as high as the 265 in that next bull run. That is remains to be seen, of course, but for the argument's sake, if I just quickly throw in here the chart of the price range, so let's say we're at these current price points of around about 26 cents, even up to that module up there is a good 500% increase. That's quite a good return, to be honest, in my opinion. And if we took that up to the next level, which I do think is definitely possible in the next run, 860%. So this is where it gets really exciting. But for right now, I've still got these limit purchase orders at these lower areas. Now, we saw this massive uptake. There were some really interesting announcements in October from Powerledger, specifically as well around the orientation that they were creating their own chain through the Solana kind of fork off, really, coming into fruition on that aspect as well. And the staking mechanisms are really improving as well as the access to it. So we had that big spike up to around 44 cents. It's now retraced to half. So if you're new to Powerledger or is something of interest to you, there's definitely some DCA opportunities here, in my opinion. And now we're balancing back at this very restrictive area that we've seen a lot of bounce off in the past. So if you can go back to September 2022 back here, and more recently around February 2023 and July 2023 respectively, there you can see there's resistance on the way up. Now, we've already penetrated that on the way down in the last month or so, and now we've retraced itself back upwards to around that 24-25 cent mark. So my indications here at the moment are to really focus personally, and this is not financial advice obviously, but my purchase focuses are now just below that 20 cent mark and potentially another retest around this 15-16 cent area, kind of where I've drawn the previous circles in the previous video. And in fact, these circles I believe were during the last video, so it was, I think the last Powerledger video we probably did was in October. So you can start to see that we've hit one of these areas. I need to check my my purchases on I think it's Qcoin or Binance, can't remember which one they're on now. But I'm pretty sure that must have been hit, so hopefully that came in. It looks like it might have done, but I do think that we could still potentially retest these areas. This is where you probably see the wave pattern flow come down traditionally slowly, especially as we hit that Christmas period. But I do believe, as I said, April's got the Bitcoin halving event in 2024. We've got the ETF launches imminently in the next month or so. And I think what we will start seeing is the last significant areas of these real big drops, and then we will start seeing higher lows over a 3 to 6 month period. And that's where I think around June time we might start seeing the beginning, the proper catalyst of a bull cycle, the very early stages of it. So I still think there's great areas here of interest for obtaining and accumulating the POWR token in your portfolio. And not just at this DCA opportunity, which I'm more than happy to be manually purchasing myself at this 25 cent rough area, but I will be waiting for these traditionally slightly lower areas as well. Let us know what you think about that and what you'll be doing with Power. You may not even be interested in it at all, but I just think it's a really interesting topic. It's a really interesting sector area. And it's certainly something that I feel is going to have a giant future, not just as the project, but the sector in general, transforming itself with AI, 5G, and of course, blockchain technology. In terms of the immediate DCA opportunities as well, I'm just going to wait a couple more days, see if we do branch back down to 20 cents, because at the moment, the RSIs on the bottom left here are pretty much nailed. Hand in hand actually, 58. So this is still a bit higher ground for me personally. I would like to see that coming down to the 48-45 mark traditionally on the 14 day at least, and similarly to the 28 day to at least get to that 47-48 mark before I start thinking about some more manual accumulation. But I think we'll see that in the next few days as the excitement here has kind of passed now in October. We had a bit of retaliation of that huge drop. Some people taken advantage and re-entered clearly here because you can see the volume uptake, and now we're just balancing on this fib level here that we've drawn in a long time ago. So it's really apparent that there's some really great interested areas here in the trading spectrum. But yes, this area down here at 18 cents is certainly a sweet spot for me, and that is very much where I'm looking to hopefully try and get another big chunk of Powerledger tokens in my portfolio. But guys, that is very much wrapping up the video today on the Powerledger project, and of course the token as well. I always try and keep these videos short and end up rambling or talking about it, but that's just because I have a very big interest in it, and hopefully some of you have learned something, or at least thought about something in a different way when we're investing, or thinking about what we're investing in and where it sits and what's coming. I think that's the biggest point here. It's not what's just coming for the project and technology itself, but the sector that it's in and what's going on around it. Guys, thanks very much for watching. We'll see you in the next Powerledger video. Bye bye.